Hi, it's Nicole. Shakespeare's sonnets are so famous, it was a bit of a shock when I first heard he didn't invent the form, nor was he the first one who used it to write love poems. It was also a surprise to me that sonnet was not even very English. It came from Italy to the English court during the 16th century via a diplomat and poet, one of the morning stars in the court of Henry VIII, Sir Thomas Wyatt. Sir Thomas Wyatt was born in 1503 and died in 1542 at the age of 39. When he died, poets celebrated his life and work. They wrote poems mourning him the same way they did for Sir Philip Sidney in 40-something years later. Another brilliant poet who was closely connected with the Tudor court was Edmund Spenser. There's a chapter about his death and funeral in 1599. There's a description of his funeral procession, which gives a picture of what Wyatt's funeral might have looked like. So it was written down by somebody called William Camden, and it does say this was a slightly unusual funeral arrangement. So we'll see, it might not be exactly the same. So as master at the school attached to Westminster Abbey, Camden was well placed to observe the day's events. Spenser's hearse was attended by poets and mournful elegies and poems, with the pens that wrote them thrown into the tomb. Camden later added that poets even carried Spenser's hearse. The poems and pens were a nice touch, a change of pace from handkerchiefs wet with tears or the sprigs of evergreen usually tossed into graves at Elizabethan funerals. The verses, which the poets had but 3 days to compose, would have first been read aloud before being ceremoniously tossed into the grave. For readers now from 500 years later, what's more well known about Thomas Wyatt is probably his love affair with Anne Boleyn, the second wife of Henry VIII. Thomas Wyatt was imprisoned in the Tower of London when he was 33 for exactly that reason. Rumour had it that he might have even watched her execution from his prison cell. I wonder how he felt. Was he really in love with her? How did he feel to watch the execution of the woman you love, to see her head separating from her body? Or was he too frightened to feel anything for her because his head could be the next on the block? Or maybe he didn't commit adultery with her at all and wasn't even in love with her. How would he feel to lose his life for a lie? But I prefer to think that he did love Anne Boleyn because it makes reading his love poems more interesting. It gives much more scope for imagination, to quote Anne Shirley. When I talk about an author or a book, I sometimes read secondary sources as something small and interesting in addition to the main text. For example, I read a letter from Charles Lamb to John Clare when I introduced Clare and his poems. I have never read any fictional account of any historical figures as a secondary source before, because you can't really use fiction to support fact, right? I know it's highly irregular, but I am going to read you a few paragraphs from Wolf Hall. It's Wolf Hall! I'm sure we can make an exception for Wolf Hall. Here's something from the scene where young Tom Wyatt came to see Thomas Cromwell. Tom Wyatt's father, Henry Wyatt, asked Cromwell to look after him at the court of Henry VIII. A few days before Parliament met, Thomas Wyatt had come to apologise for getting Cromwell out of bed before dawn on New Year's Day. "You have every right to be angry with me, but I've come to ask you not to be. You know how it is at New Year. Toasts are drunk, and the bowls goes round, and you must drain the bowl." He watches Wyatt as he walks about the room, too curious and restless and half shy to sit down and make his amends face to face. He turns the painted globe of the world and rests his forefinger on England. He stops to look at pictures, at a little altarpiece, and he turns, questioning. "It was my wife's," he says. Cromwell says, "I keep it for her sake." Master Wyatt wears a jacket of stiffened cream brocade trimmed with sables, which he probably cannot afford. He wears a doublet of tawny silk. He has tender blue eyes and a mane of golden hair, thinning now. Sometimes he put his fingertips to his head, tentative, as if he still has his New Year headache. Really, he is checking his hairline to see if he has receded in the last 5 minutes. He stops and looks at himself in the mirror. He does this very often. Dear God, he says, rolling about the streets with that crowd. I'm too old for such behavior, but too young to lose my hair. Do you think women care about it? Much? Do you think if I grew a beard, it would distract? No, probably not. But perhaps I will anyway. The king's beard looks well, does it not? He says, didn't your father give you any advice? Oh, yes. Drink off a bowl of milk before you go out. Stewed quinces in honey. Do you think that works? He's trying not to laugh. He wants to take it seriously, his new post as Wyatt's father. He says, I mean, did he never advise you to stay away from women in whom the king is interested? I did stay away. You remember I went to Italy. After that, I was in Calais for a year. How much staying away can a man do? A question from his own life. He recognizes it. Wyatt sits down on a small stool. He props his elbows on his knees. He holds his head, fingertips on his temples. He is listening to his own heartbeat. He is thinking. Perhaps he is composing a verse? He looks up. My father says that now Wolsey is dead, you are the cleverest man in England. So can you understand this if I say it just once? If Anne is not a virgin, that's none of my doing. I love so many things about this scene. I love how from Cromwell's eyes we see Thomas Wyatt, a grown man, still young but old enough, walks about the room, too curious and restless and half shy to sit down and make his amends face to face. He is still a child and fidgeting, turns the painted globe and stops to look at pictures. He's well dressed, he's fair and beautiful, narcissistic, but innocently so. I love how Mantel doesn't make him a perfect fair youth. His mane of golden hair is thinning. We haven't known the beautiful and brilliant Thomas Wyatt for 2 minutes and his beauty is already fading. Which nicely leads to the poem I want to read you today. The poem is about him losing it. He was so sought after, but maybe because his hair was thinning, he was the favorite no more. This is one of the better known poems by him called They Flee From Me. I'll read it once from the top to the bottom and we'll look at each section in a bit more detail. They flee from me, that sometime did me seek, with naked foot stalking in my chamber. I have seen them gentle, tame, and meek, that now are wild, and do not remember that sometime they put themselves in danger to take bread at my hand, and now they range, busily seeking with a continual change. Thanked be fortune it hath been otherwise, 20 times better. But once in special, in thin array, after a pleasant guise, when her loose gown from her shoulders did fall, and she me caught in her arms long and small. Therewithal sweetly did me kiss, and softly said, Dear heart, how like it this? It was no dream, I lay broad waking, but always turned, thorough my gentleness, into a strange fashion of forsaking. And I have leave to go of her goodness, and she also to use newfangleness. But since that I so kindly am served, I fain would know what she has deserved. They flee from me that sometime did me seek, with naked foot stalking in my chamber. I have seen them gentle, tame, and meek, that now are wild, and do not remember that sometime they put themselves in danger to take bread at my hand. And now they range, busily seeking with a continual change. I like how it's mostly self-explanatory. The only thing is it's probably helpful to know sometime, according to Johnson's dictionary, means once formally. So they, in context, most likely women, used to come and look for me. They wanted to be close to me. They also didn't wear shoes. And it gives me a cat-like image. Don't know about you. These cat animals, women, used to be gentle, tame, and meek like house cats, but they are now wild. They are now beasts. They used to put themselves in danger to be able to stay close to him, to take bread at my hand. Gives a bird-like image. These bird women would hop close to him and pick up breadcrumbs. The image is a mixture of risk, vulnerability, and trust, but they are now like wild animals hunting at large. I think he shows more the picture of the Tudor court than the poet's personal love life. He doesn't say if he loves any of them. He's quite cold and indifferent. He just calls them they, generically. The tone is bitter and regretful. They used to love me, but now they don't. I used to be the favorite and the center of attention, but now I'm not. Thanked be fortune, it has been otherwise. 20 times better, but once in special, in thin array after a pleasant guise, when her loose gown from her shoulders did fall, and she me caught in her arms long and small. Therewithal sweetly did me kiss, and softly said, "Dear heart, how like you this?" He now looks back at a particular incident. It's not they and them anymore. There's a specific she. I don't think I need to explain more. It's plain enough. I wonder who this is and what is this when he says, "Dear heart, how like you this?" The explicit description really gives me a John Donne vibe. It was no dream. I lay broad waking, but all is turned, thorough my gentleness, into a strange fashion of forsaking. And I have leave to go of her goodness, and she also to use newfangleness. But since that I so kindly am served, I fain would know what she has deserved. He stays wide awake thinking about it, this once special, about this dear heart who dumped him. He phrases the situation sarcastically. "I have leave to go. You may go now." Norton explains newfangleness as fickleness or vain and foolish love of novelty in Johnson's dictionary. She desires me no more because she has new toys to play with. I so kindly am served. I hope she gets what she deserves. At the beginning of this video, I mentioned how I was surprised that Sonnet had a life before Shakespeare took hold of it. I am going to end with a sonnet by Thomas Wyatt, 14 lines, iambic pentameter. Notice the common themes between this and They Flee From Me, women's change of affection and attachment, the court scene in the background, etc. I love the quick mention of his own profession, being a brilliant poet himself. Somehow he knows poems and words are ultimately powerless to win a lover's heart. The bigger reason why I want to read this is so you can have a feel of this brand new form of poetry at the time, before it was made iconic by Shakespeare. It's called Divers Doth Use. Divers doth use, as I have heard and know, when that to change their ladies do begin, to mourn and wail, and never fall to lean, hoping thereby to peace their painful woe. And some there be that when it chances so, that women change and hate where love has been, they call them false, and think with words to win the hearts of them which other where does grow. But as for me, though that by chance indeed change hath outworn the favour that I had, I will not wail, lament, nor yet be sad, nor call her false that falsely did me feed. But let it pass, and think it is of kind that often change does please a woman's mind. That's all for today. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in my next one.